Step right up, ladies and gentlemen, we have creepy old men, flying dead kids, and what could be our first glimpse of Pennywise the Clown. It Welcome to Derry continues the scares as we head into episode 3, and with it even more clues, mysteries, and theories. We'll be going over Dick Hallorann's vision, General Shaw's secret past, and what's next for our kids as they continue their journey uncovering Pennywise. I also have an insane theory that the show will introduce a daughter to Pennywise, one that works alongside him and we've actually seen the adult version of, but that will be in my trailer sleuthing section. Be warned, there will be film and book spoilers. Now be sure to like and subscribe, and this week's emoji to put in the comments is a camera. I write, edit, and produce these videos all by myself, so every little bit helps. The episode begins in 1908. This is a really important year for a number of reasons. When Ben Hanscom researches the history of Derry, we see that this is the year of the kitchen ironworks explosion, an event that's depicted in the series opening credits, which saw 102 people die, 88 of them children. The ironworks was the location of an Easter egg hunt, hence why we see someone dressed in a bunny costume on fire, and these kids with Easter egg baskets. But if you look closely in the background, you can make out Pennywise's wagon. This explosion is said to be the main focus of Season 3 of It Welcome to Derry, with the Bradley Gang Massacre being the focus of Season 2 set in 1935. 1908 also fits perfectly with It's feeding cycle, a cycle which occurs every 27 years. Now I just love these old style carnivals, and there's a bunch of cool little details here. I can't help but think of the twins from The Shining when I see these two. The name Boojak here is the name of one of the camera operators from the show. Plus we get a quick shot of a turtle. Turtles are a nod to Maturin, an ancient cosmic protector and counterpart to It found in the novel. And bonus points if you caught the piano player is director of the show, Andy Muschietti. This super thin guy makes me think of Stephen King's Thinner, but that might be a stretch. And the House of Mirrors is a nice juxtaposition to the House of Mirrors scene we see over 100 years later in It Chapter 2. I love this idea that Derry's had a traveling carnival come every year. This is where we meet 12-year-old Francis Shaw, the man that will become general at the nearby Derry Air Force Base in 1962. His father works at this base too, however, as we'll find out later, they'll soon be redeployed. In the freak show, Shaw will have his first run-in with the entity, which takes the form of a skinny, one-eyed old man. Remember that it manifests into our greatest fears, so something about a creepy old dude really freaks Shaw out. While their car breaks down, Shaw meets Rose. This is the same woman who runs the antique shop in '62. Fun fact, Stephen King runs this shop in 2016. It's Shaw who hands over his slingshot to trade for some water, a weapon that will later be given back to him when he tells Rose he's leaving town. This weapon was used to attack the entity, which may give it a special connection to it. That's why Shaw will later hand this over to Dick Hallorann to see if it will lead them to a mysterious object they've been searching for. Slingshots have played an important role in it. In the novel, a slingshot is what young Beverly uses in the Neibolt house to attack it. However, in the movie version, it's changed to an iron rod. Shaw and Rose make it out of the forest alive, but here's something I found really interesting. The entity won't go beyond the forest's edge. We know from It Chapter 2 that the Native Americans who have been on Derryland for centuries before the Europeans purposely moved outside the bounds of this entity's power. They know how far this thing can reach. Now this is likely why the military is searching for this object. Imagine if it could be weaponized to instill fear into America's enemies. I don't believe it's said in the show, but this could be the Shakapiwa tribe, a fictional indigenous group first seen in the films and considered the first ones who fought it. They were the ones who tried to contain it with a ritual based on belief, a ritual known as the Ritual of Chud. When Shaw returns to Derry, he's surprised to see Rose's name on the cease and desist letter. This is a name he forgot, even though he promised he'd never forget her as a child. This is something we know from the movies. Once you leave Derry, you tend to forget what happened there. This is what happened to the adults of the Losers Club. Everyone but Mike, who stayed in Derry, started to forget their childhood memories, only for them to slowly come back as they returned to town.
This place has a way to make people forget, even if they don't want to.
Shaw reveals that he's in charge of the dig site, lying to her saying it's all part of a plan to lay new pipes. Rose has her nephew Tennille keeping tabs on the place, and it won't take a rocket scientist to figure out this isn't about laying pipe. But Rose secretly wants the military to continue what they're doing, at least until she's figured out what they're up to. I suspect this isn't going to be the last time Rose and Shaw reconnect. She may even try to reignite their relationship in an effort to find out what's really going on. Now let's shift gears and talk about how these kids are going to prove this it entity is real. At the end of episode 2, Lily Bainbridge was haunted by her pickle daddy, an outburst that found her returning to Juniper Hill. This is the iconic Stephen King insane asylum found in titles such as The Tommyknockers, Insomnia, and Gerald's Game. It's even shown, albeit using a different location, in the King-based TV series Castle Rock. This is where patients like It's Henry Bowers and Gerald's Game's Raymond Joubert were committed, so it's kind of wild to think Lily's in the same place as these guys. Remember, this isn't her first time here. She was sent shortly after the death of her father after having a sort of mental break, but it looks like her stay here isn't that long. She's given chlorpromazine, an antipsychotic used to treat conditions like schizophrenia and psychosis. But I want to take a moment to talk about this woman. The actress here is given her own credit in the intro, but her character is never named. The doctor simply refers to her as a woman who works in housekeeping who's built a bond with Lily. According to Dish.com, this woman has deep roots to Derry's past and whose knowledge of the town's dark secrets may hold the key to Pennywise's origins. Stick around to my trailer sleuthing section, we're going to talk about her a lot more. When Ronnie returns to school, she's greeted with dirty looks and a Hatchet Hank's gonna fry emblazoned on her locker. Last episode, her father Hank was taken into custody for the murders of Phil and Susie Malkin and Theo Uris. We'll see him in the Derry jail have a short meeting with Sheriff Clint Bowers, an ancestor of Butch and Henry. Clint was pressured into making this arrest by city council members, even though the evidence was non-existent. We'll see just how corrupt he is when he states an eyewitness saw Hank at 11:30 p.m. near the theater the night of the murder. Plus, Hank's favorite brand of cigarettes, Embassy Gold, were found at the scene of the crime. I mean, of course you'll find a pack there, that's where he works. Clint warns Hank that he's headed to Shawshank Penitentiary, a prison featured in many of King's works, but most famously the Shawshank Redemption. Since it's 1962, theoretically he could arrive there the same time that Andy Dufresne's there. Because Ronnie's graffiti was done in lipstick, we can guess it was written by one of the members of the Mean Girl clique, the Patty Cakes. We saw just how cruel they can be last episode. The last person Ronnie wants to see is Lily, whose interview with Sheriff Bowers landed Hank in jail, but things have changed the last time these two talked. Both of them experienced visits from it. They're the only two who know of this thing's existence, but they don't have a way to prove it's real. If they could prove it, they could exonerate Ronnie's father, and Lily wouldn't be seen as crazy. A fun detail, but the Van Helden rubbing alcohol is named after a graphic designer on the show and can also be seen as one of the missing children. Using Lily's camera, they decide to capture the entity on film. The only thing is they can't exactly have it developed in town for fear it could be destroyed. That's where Will and Rich come in. When they're not discussing who has the better tatas in town, these two are being roped into a scheme to prove an evil entity has taken over town. And Will, with his science knowledge, just might be the go-to guy to help them develop this film. Lily brings them to the Derry standpipe, the abandoned hideout Maddie took her to in episode 1. This seems to be the place where Lily has to prove to people that this entity exists, as in episode 1, this is where she tried to get Theo and Phil to believe Maddie's fingers appeared in her sewer pipe. Rich believes it could be an Oricha, a divine spirit in Cuban lore that acts as an intermediary between the Supreme Creator and the people. Will, well, he's not sure what to believe. He's a man of science, and this isn't exactly what you'd find in a textbook. Still, Rich and Will decide to join them because, hey, what better way to spend your time in a small town than engaging in haunted seances in your local cemetery? First of all, big shout out to these kids because there's no way in hell I'd do this when I was 12 years old. Rich conducts the ceremony following the rules he heard from his cousin who heard from his uncle who was an Ifa priest. Needless to say, he was full of shit, but when the kids decide to bounce, they're attacked by ghosts of Teddy, Susie, and Rich's uncle. The haunted bike ride sequence sees the camera being swamped more than Bonnie Blue. Will ends up separated from the rest where he uncovers something in a nearby crypt. You can actually catch 2 glimpses of it, one here and one here. It isn't until the film's developed, however, that we get a look at what it is. Breaking into the school's photography lab, the kids develop the photos. One of them shows Teddy's ghost, while the other, the The one Will took in the crypt shows Pennywise. So we have this quote-unquote proof. What's gonna happen next? And I'm gonna guess not a heck of a lot. The powers that be in Derry are already primed not to believe anything that proves this entity's existence. In my last video, I talked about how the town subconsciously looks past all the corruption and violence the entity instills on the people. I'm thinking 3 things could happen next with these photos. A, they could be destroyed. B, when the adults look at them, the ghosts have vanished. Or C, it isn't good enough proof, or they're too blurry for anything to really change. There's one particular shot in the trailers I think shows what happens, but I'll save that for my trailer sleuthing section. Arguably the biggest mystery of the show is what's going on with the military and their search for this mysterious object. At the end of last episode, a large 1920s-30s automobile filled with skeletons, Tommy guns, and cash was recovered from the dig site. General Shaw tells us the whole thing was dismantled in search, but what they're looking for wasn't found. In fact, what they're looking for was buried 300 years before the automobile was even invented. The automobile as we know it was invented around 1886, so this burial would have occurred in the late 1500s, which is about 2 decades before any permanent European colonies were established in Maine, meaning this burial would have likely been done by the Native Americans. We also learned that this particular automobile was part of another big Derry event, the Bradley Gang Massacre of 1935. This event can also be seen on a town mural in the It movies. Here Colonel Fuller makes distinct mention of the entity, so the military is aware of it. Who told them about this, and how does Dick Hallorann fit into it all? It was Dick who led the team to this automobile, and Fuller recounts how the It entity was seen at the site of this Bradley Gang massacre. So there is a connection between objects It has interacted with and Dick's powers. It's why Shaw gives Dick his slingshot. By touching it, Dick's connection with the entity strengthens. Some of the top theories of what they're looking for are A, Pennywise and the lair, which the military would want to weaponize, or B, parts of the meteor that crash-landed millennia ago. Remember, whatever it is they're looking for would have to be over 300 years old. Now that Shaw has found a man with no fear in Leroy Hanlon, a man who had his small amygdala damaged in the Korean War, that part of the brain that handles fear, they can take him and Hallorann on quote-unquote surveillance missions. By having Dick up in the air, they can basically use him like a human compass. And now that he's armed with an object that might strengthen this signal, they head up into the air. Dick guides Hanlon as he touches the slingshot and witnesses the events Shaw experienced as a child. At least that's what's implied. This is called psychometry, the ability to sense information about a person, place, or event by touching an object. Characters like Johnny in The Dead Zone also possess this ability. Dick soon finds himself in a trance and transported to Pennywise's lair. There he sees Pennywise's glowing eyes who ask him, "Who are you?" This is really interesting as we've never really seen Pennywise as the one asking the questions. Dick will later question whether they should just give up this search because this thing wasn't supposed to see him and now it knows they're coming. He gets the feeling if they continue to search, something very bad will happen. Dick experiences quick flashes of a Mardi Gras mask, a dead soldier, trenches, and a woman. These might all be connected to fears from his past. If he fought in Korea or World War II, that might explain the dead soldier. The woman in the nightgown might be his grandmother, one who we'll see floating in Pennywise's lair. In The Shining, we know that Dick had a special connection with his grandmother, who also possessed the ability to shine. He states that sometimes they'd even have full conversations with each other just in their heads. As for the Carnival mask, we don't really know if Dick spent any time near a city like New Orleans where Mardi Gras type of masks are worn, although Mike Flanagan did have Dick living in New Orleans in a now scrapped prequel idea. Dick almost flings himself from the back of the plane, but is broken out of his trance and stopped. Shaw reiterates how important this mission is and tells Hallorann he did great work, granting him more special privileges. Dick wants a place where he and the boys don't have to worry about the rain crashing down on them, so I think Shaw will hook them up with a place that will eventually become the Black Spot, an African-American speakeasy where the airmen can unwind that eventually gets burned down by it. Dick is invited over to the Halloranns for dinner. He can read minds, which is how he senses Charlotte isn't quite at ease in this town. Back in Shreveport, she was heavily involved in the civil rights movement, but here in Derry, she has to hold herself back as it might affect her husband's ability to work his way up in the military, so there's gotta be a little resentment there. Dick also knows about Leroy's son, even though Leroy never mentioned him. and due to Leroy's broken brain, he can somehow sense when Dick is digging in there. He felt that same sensation the night he was attacked by the gas mask men. This is how he deduced Dick was one of those men. Dick had to be there in order to confirm Leroy really felt no fear. Dick also tells Leroy about his ability, however he doesn't really know how to describe it, basically stating that it's like seeing things without seeing things. Leroy saved his life and Dick agrees never to go digging in his head again, going on to state he wouldn't mind having a man without fear beside him in the trenches. This likely foreshadows the two of them going to war together, not against a country, but against the entity itself. Now we head into our trailer sleuthing section where we take a look at the trailers to see what could be in store in the episodes ahead. Charlotte here with Rose. Because she's such an activist, I wouldn't be surprised if she joins up with the Native Americans against the military's dig sites. The kids here in front of Sheriff Bowers, who tells them to keep their noses out of police business. Maybe they went to him to show the developed pictures and he completely dismisses them. Something really bad happens at the school, as we'll see kids clamoring for the doors, and later this shot of Patty and the others floating with their eyeballs spinning back. Ronnie's father Hank being sent to Shawshank prison, so it doesn't look like the kids' plan has made any traction. Lily uncovering an old photo album that looks like it's from 1908. The show has hinted at a Pennywise origin story. The kids heading into the DERRY sewers, and we see that Marge has joined the group. A meteor crash lands, most likely the meteor that contains the entity. Here's Dick haunted by a woman. Is it his grandma or someone else? I also think that building behind him is the black spot, which we'll also see more images of in the behind-the-scenes footage. Some of the footage shows this gray smoke or mist descending upon the town. One theory argues a big connection to Stephen King's The Mist. In it, a government program called the Arrowhead Project attempts to access other dimensions and inadvertently releases monsters. As a fun fact, one of the buildings in town is called the Arrowhead. Operation Precept is reminiscent of Project Arrowhead and could be a prequel explanation for how the military first learned to exploit interdimensional entities. The dig sites therefore might be conduits or portals to the macroverse, the universes beyond and around our own. The girls will uncover dozens of missing persons posters plastered along the standpipe during this mist. We can see that one of them is Patricia from school. This looks to be Tennille, handcuffed and interrogated. Perhaps he got caught trying to infiltrate one of the military dig sites. He'll eventually join Leroy amongst the mist. We'll see more of him in the Weeks Ahead trailer where he talks about people going into his head and doing something to him. Perhaps while being interrogated, Dick goes into his mind to see if he's telling the truth. The girl's here holding a glowing ancient relic. Could this be part of what the military is looking for? At another dig site, we'll see this white object. Is it part of the meteor that crash landed, or a relic from DERRY's past? I think this is the housekeeper woman Lily befriends at Juniper Hill. She says rather creepily, no one in DERRY ever really dies. And just the way she says it makes me think she's evil or some sort of manifestation of Pennywise. In fact, this might be her in this shot here while Lily's looking at those albums. Dish.com did say that this character knows a lot about DERRY's past and Pennywise. We also see a child next to the human version of Pennywise. Maybe she is Pennywise's daughter, or at least the human version before it manifested as Pennywise. This could mean she is sadistically working with Pennywise, believing there is some version of her dad still in there. What if this woman was the little girl clown we saw at the beginning of the episode? In the Visit the Set video, we do see that this carnival features Pennywise. What if they were a father-daughter duo that traveled with the circus? Speaking of Pennywise, we get a lot of shots of him with flames in the background. This seems to be too small to be the black spot, and the Kitchener Ironworks fire isn't supposed to happen until season 3. My best guess is that this is the school, perhaps the gymnasium where a school dance happens and we see the children fall under Pennywise's spell. This would explain the zombie-like figures behind him. But now I want to hear your thoughts and theories. What did you think of this week's episode? Write in the comments below. Thanks for watching, be sure to like and subscribe, and for more bad takes, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ThinkStoryYT. Until next time, remember,
Daddy loves you very much.